It's Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance, and we're joined today by Christy Smith. She is a nominee for a seat in the California State Assembly, also a member of the Newhall School Board. I'd like to speak with you about education. I know you're looking to create an environment where local schools can spend local money to improve local outcomes.
Right.
As you know, we now have what's known as the local control funding formula, which gives school districts more autonomy.
Right.
Or does it?
It does. It has. Local control funding formula has allowed school districts to move away from what had been categorically defined education programs of the past. And so really kind of broaden their horizons and how they want to present the new standards, which are based on the Common Core curriculum,
Right.
which have been very innovative and I think really moving the needle for kids in terms of academic achievement, particularly in English language arts and in mathematics.
I want to talk about both of those issues. Let's
Yeah.
stay on LCFF, because with regard to LCFF, there's no question that power has devolved from
Sure.
Sacramento to locals. But there's also no question that school districts that serve the more economically challenged
Right.
will get more money than the wealthier districts. Now
Sure.
that may seem appropriate, but a district like Newhall, I don't have a sense, where do you fall on that spectrum?
Yeah, we're kind of right there in that space where we're not getting the full
The bumps.
maximum that you can get on the supplemental grant. We do get some supplemental funding, which is
Right.
very helpful, but we fall under that cap. So we need to, as a state legislature going forward, be aware of that and be tracking what's happening in these districts
Right.
like mine, where we're not at that full capacity, the
55%.
55%, and what it means in terms of their funding, because we still are required to deliver
Right.
the same quality program.
Do you feel as if, though, that maybe we hit the sweet spot using that 55% number as a way to get a supplemental grant, but still providing additional funds, which follows a child who may be economically disadvantaged, foster care, ESL?
Yeah, and that was the new model actually they looked at the federal reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Act, that the dollars follow the student. And I think that actually may be the way that we go in the future, particularly as you start to look at the expansion of alternative schools and the charter movement and how resources track across borders of what used to be defined. You know, the municipal governance of a school board was based on geographic borders and the number of students, and that determined the funding. But now we're seeing students going across all of these geographic boundaries into different school settings, and what that means in terms of the funding based on the needs of the child is something we really need to keep an eye on.
You mentioned Common Core, and I'm lucky in my job in that I get to travel to other states and interview folks like yourself in various state capitals. When I say the word Common Core in other states, it is worse than a dirty word. Not all states,
Right.
some states. When I say Common Core in California, I don't get that sense, even in more, let's call it red areas or conservative
Sure.
areas. Am I reading it correctly? Because I feel like you're in kind of a purple area, so you
Yeah.
could have some strong opinions.
In other states, it was heavily politicized, and the federal dollars that were tied to some of the rollout of Common Core were very politicized in other states. But really, it was a program that was generated out of the Governors Association and the National Chamber of Commerce, looking at ways that we could get very targeted, specific training for these kids, whether they were on a career pathway or whether they were college bound.
What I found interesting about Common Core and continue to find interesting is this notion of we're going to teach fewer concepts, but we're going to go much deeper.
Much deeper.
How has that played? It's been a couple years.
It's been fantastic. You know, the teachers in my district and across our community have been phenomenal in their approach to how they've done it. So they've piloted a number of different learning strategies, a number of different teaching methodologies, but it really has worked, and we have seen huge increases in 1 year in mathematic capacity just based on kind of that depth of knowledge and a mathematics literacy that you didn't see before.
And let's talk about that, because of course we know that every year students take standardized tests.
Right.
And when Common Core was first adopted, California chose the Smarter Balanced Assessment. I guess 3 years ago the scores weren't reported.
Right.
They were 2 years ago, and then this past year. So 2 years ago the scores were what they were. It was the first year as a
Yeah.
baseline.
Right.
The good news is that the scores that came out last year were better than the year before, but still a little troubling.
Right.
When you look at math and overall achievement, either exceeding or meeting standards, we're at about 37%. Better than 33% from
Right.
the prior year, but what's your sense? Is it that it's a new standard. Kids aren't really sure how to work the computer model as opposed to fill in the bubble. What do you think?
It's all of the above. We need to push out more technology into classrooms. You know, that technology is one of the biggest unfunded mandates in the state of California. We require technology curriculum, but there is not funding for implementation in schools, and there's certainly not funding for the upkeep. You know, if you've got 30 kids a day using a piece of equipment, it's going to wear out pretty quickly. And that expense is borne by school districts, many of which can't afford it. And the broadband that goes, and all of the things that go along with that. And then the other piece of it is we are only a couple of years into implementation. We're still figuring out what those best strategies are. And in fact, if I'm fortunate enough to be elected, one of the things I feel really strongly about is coming up with best practice academies regionally to allow teachers to coordinate and collaborate on what's working in their school system with like schools, because we know where the outliers of the really high success rates are and where the outliers of where they're struggling a little bit. So let's get those teaching teams together, let them work together to figure out best strategy. And
along those lines, when we look at standardized test results, we see true and palpable achievement gaps. Our Asian American students in math, for example, are at 72% exceeding or meeting standards, whereas our African American students are at 18, our Latino students are at 24, and what I think may be the most telling actually is our economically disadvantaged students, which captures a wider subset at 24%.
Sure.
So how can your best practices model try to cure this just huge chasm?
Because it really is about instructional practice and the regular practice in the classroom of techniques that reach kids. And there are some schools who are very successful at that, reaching the low socioeconomic and the English language learner population in a way that really moves achievement. You know, in our own school district, McGrath has excelled at that. With over 85% on free and reduced lunch at that school. They rank almost as high as our predominantly middle class kids do. So the methodologies are there. It's just a matter of pushing it out. And it's also a matter of realizing that, you know, we are about 30 years removed from when we were nationally competitive as a state in terms of what we spend per student on education.
Gotten better with Prop 30.
It's gotten better with Prop 30, and I'm hopeful that we will be able to continue that with the extension with Prop 55. Otherwise, there will be economic consequences as well as educational consequences. But we need to do better. We need to be nationally competitive with what we're spending per student, because in California, we have a student population with some of the most significant learning needs, as you just highlighted.
Are you concerned in that Prop 30, there's two pieces to it. There's the sales tax increase, and then there's the tax on the wealthiest. The sales tax increase is sunsetting, no questions asked. On the ballot in November, there's the extension on the wealthiest. That will bring in some revenue, but not anywhere near the sales tax increase. So are you concerned about that loss of funding?
I am concerned about that. So then the other thing that we need to do tangent to that is make sure that we're focusing on all of the other areas that will lead us to economic growth. So infrastructure, investment, making sure that we get water infrastructure resolved sooner rather than later. That's going to have a significant impact on our economy. Building housing. You know, UCLA economic forecast has said that our housing shortage will start very soon to impact our economic growth if we don't get moving on some building again. So all of those things become an important piece of underpinning the state's budget and what we can spend on education.
So am I to presume that if you are victorious, you will ask to be on the education committee?
Absolutely.
What other committees might you consider?
You know, other committees as assigned. I am a policy wonk, and I believe in evidence-based public policy making. So whatever committee other than education that I'm assigned to, I'll dig in, I'll do the work, and do the best job I can.
Okay, her name is Christy Smith. She is a member of the Newhall Unified School District Board. She is running for the California State Assembly. She is a nominee in what district number?
38.
38, which covers significant portions of LA County and Ventura County. My name is Brad Pomerance. We thank you so much for joining us.
Crippling higher education costs, public safety funding shortfalls, a drought crisis.
I'm Christy Smith. I'm running for Assembly to take on the big issues that impact our families, like improving our schools, creating jobs, and keeping our neighborhoods safe.
Christy Smith, State Assembly.